Hello and welcome to what is the penultimate reading from It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet by James Herriot. Tonight we are looking at chapters 28 through to 30, and then the last reading will be chapters 31 to 33. So, chapter 28. As I stopped my car by the group of gypsies, I felt I was looking at something which should have been captured by a camera. The grass verge was wide on this loop of the road, and there were 5 of them squatting round the fire. It seemed like the mother and father and 3 little girls. They sat very still, regarding me blankly through the drifting smoke, while a few big snowflakes floated across the scene and settled lazily on the tangled hair of the children. Some unreal quality in the wild tableau kept me motionless in my seat, staring through the glass, forgetful of the reason for my being here. Then I wound down the window and spoke to the man. "Are you Mr. Myatt? I believe you have a sick pony." The man nodded. "Aye, that's right. He's over here." It was a strange accent with no trace of Yorkshire in it. That's funny, because I've just done a Yorkshire accent. He got up from the fire, a thin, dark-skinned, unshaven little figure, and came over to the car holding out something in his hand. It was a 10-shilling note, and I recognised it as a gesture of good faith. The gypsies who occasionally wandered into Darrowby were always regarded with a certain amount of suspicion. They came, unlike the Myatts, mainly in the summer to camp down by the river and sell their horses, and we had been caught out once or twice before. A lot of them seemed to be called Smith, and it wasn't uncommon to go back on the second day and find that patient and owner had gone. In fact, Siegfried had shouted to me as I left the house this morning, "Get the brass if you can!" But he needn't have worried. Mr. Myatt was on the up and up. I got out of the car and followed him over the grass, past the shabby, ornate caravan and the lurcher dog, tied to the wheel to where a few horses and ponies were tethered. My patient was easy to find, a handsome piebald of about 13 hands with good, clean legs and a look of class about him. But he was in a sorry state. While the other animals moved around on their tethers, watching us with interest, the piebald stood as though carved from stone. Even from a distance I could tell what was wrong with him. Only acute laminitis could produce that crouching posture, and as I moved nearer I could see that all 4 feet were probably affected, because the pony had his hind feet right under his body in a desperate attempt to take his full weight on his heels. I pushed my thermometer into the rectum. "Has he been getting any extra food, Mr. Myatt?" "Aye. He getting into a bag of oats last night." The little man showed me the big, half-empty sack in the back of the caravan. It was difficult to understand him, but he managed to convey that the pony had broken loose and gorged himself on the oats, and he had given him a dose of castor oil. He called it castor illa. The thermometer read 104, and the pulse was rapid and bounding. I passed my hand over the smooth trembling hooves, feeling the abnormal heat. Then I looked at the taut face, the dilated nostrils and terrified eyes. Anybody who has had an infection under fingernail can have an inkling of the agony a horse goes through when the sensitive laminae of the foot are inflamed and throbbing against the unyielding wall of the hoof. "Can you get him to move?" I asked. The man caught hold of the head collar and pulled, but the pony refused to budge. I took the other side of the collar. "Come on. It's always better if they can get moving." We pulled together, and Mrs. Myatt slapped the pony's rump. He took a couple of stumbling steps, but it was as though the ground was red hot, and he groaned as his feet came down. Within seconds he was crouching again with his weight on his heels. "It seems he just won't have it." I turned and went back to the car. I'd have to do what I could to give him relief, and the first thing was to get rid of as much as possible of that bellyful of oats. I fished out the bottle of arecaline and gave an injection into the muscle of the neck. Then I showed the little man how to tie cloths round the hooves so that he could keep soaking them with cold water. Afterwards I stood back and looked again at the pony. He was salivating freely from the arecoline, and he had cocked his tail and evacuated his bowel. But his pain was undiminished, and it would stay like that until the tremendous inflammation had subsided, if it ever did. I had seen cases like this where serum had started to ooze from the coronet. That usually meant shedding of the hooves, even death. As I turned over the gloomy thoughts, the 3 little girls went up to the pony. The biggest put her arms round his neck and laid her cheek against his shoulder, while the others stroked the shivering flanks. There were no tears, no change in the blank expressions, but it was easy to see that that pony really meant something to them. Before leaving, I handed over a bottle of tincture of aconite mixture. "Get a dose of this down him every 4 hours, Mr. Myatt, and be sure to keep putting cold water on the feet. I'll come and see him in the morning." I closed the car door and looked through the window again at the slow-rising smoke, the drifting snowflakes, and the 3 children, with their ragged dresses and uncombed hair, still stroking the pony. "Well, you got the brass, James," Siegfried said at lunch, carelessly stuffing the 10-shilling note into a bulging pocket. "What was the trouble?" "Worst case of laminitis I've ever seen. Couldn't move the pony at all, and he's going through hell. I've done the usual things, but I'm pretty sure they aren't going to be enough." "Not a very bright prognosis, then." "Really black. Even if he gets over the acute stage, he'll have deformed feet, I'd like to bet. Grooved hooves, dropped soles, the lot. And he's a grand little animal, lovely piebald. I wish to God there was something else I could do." Siegfried saw 2 thick slices off the cold mutton and dropped them on my plate. He looked thoughtfully at me for a moment. "You've been a little distrait since you came back. These are rotten jobs, I know, but it's no good worrying." "Ah, I'm not worrying exactly, but I can't get it off my mind. Maybe it's those people, the Myatts. They were something new to me, right out of the world, and 3 raggedy little girls absolutely crazy about that pony. They aren't going to like it at all." As Siegfried chewed his mutton, I could see the old glint coming into his eyes. It showed when the talk had anything to do with horses. I knew he wouldn't push in, but he was waiting for me to make the first move. I made it. "I wish you'd come along and have a look with me. Maybe there's something you could suggest. Do you think there could be?" Siegfried put down his knife and fork and stared in front of him for a few seconds. Then he turned to me. "You know, James, there just might be. Quite obviously this is a right pig of a case, and the ordinary remedies aren't going to do any good. We have to pull something out of the bag, and I've got an idea. There's just one thing." He gave me a crooked smile. "You may not like it." "Don't bother about me," I said. "You're the horseman. If you can help this pony, I don't care what you do." "Right. Eat up then, and we'll go into action together." We finished our meal, and he led me through to the instrument room. I was surprised when he opened the cupboard where old Mr. Grant's instruments were kept. It was a kind of museum. When Siegfried had bought the practice from the old vet who had worked on into his 80s, these instruments had come with it, and they lay there in rows, unused but undisturbed. It would have been logical to throw them out, but maybe Siegfried felt the same way about them as I did. The polished wooden boxes of shining, odd-shaped scalpels, the enema pumps and douches with their perished rubber and brass fittings, the Seton needles, the ancient firing irons. They were a silent testament to 60 years of struggle. I often used to open the cupboard door and try to picture the old man wrestling with the same problems as I had, travelling the same narrow roads as I did. He had done it absolutely on his own and for 60 years. I was only starting, but I knew a little about the triumphs and disasters, the wondering and worrying, the hopes and disappointments, and the hard labour. Anyway, Mr. Grant was dead and gone, taking with him all the skills and knowledge I was doggedly trying to accumulate. Siegfried reached to the back of the cupboard and pulled out a long flat box. He blew the dust from the leather covering and gingerly unfastened the clasp. Inside, a fleam, glittering on its bed of frayed velvet, lay by the side of a round polished bloodstick. I looked at my employer in astonishment. "You're going to bleed him, then?" "Yes, my boy. I'm going to take you back to the Middle Ages." He looked at my startled face and put a hand on my arm. "But don't start beating me over the head with all the scientific arguments against bloodletting. I've no strong views either way." "But have you ever done it? I've never seen you use this outfit." "I've done it, and I've seen some funny things after it, too." Siegfried turned away as if he wanted no more discussion. He cleaned the fleam thoroughly and dropped it into the sterilizer. His face was expressionless as he stood listening to the hiss of the boiling water. The gypsies were again hunched over the fire when we got there, and Mr. Myatt, sensing that reinforcements had arrived, scrambled to his feet and shuffled forward, holding out another 10-shilling note. Siegfried waved it away. "Let's see how we get on, Mr. Myatt," he grunted. He strode across the grass to where the pony still trembled in his agonized crouch. There was no improvement. In fact, the eyes stared more wildly, and I could hear little groans as the piebald carefully eased himself from foot to foot. Siegfried spoke softly without looking at me. "Poor beggar. You weren't exaggerating, James. Bring that box from the car, will you?" When I came back, he was tying a choke rope round the base of the pony's neck. "Put it up tight," he said. As the jugular rose up tense and turgid in its furrow, he quickly clipped and disinfected a small area and inserted a plaque of old local anaesthetic. Finally, he opened the old leather-covered box and extracted the fleam wrapped in sterile lint. Everything seemed to start happening then. Siegfried placed the little blade of the fleam against the bulging vein, and without hesitation gave it a confident smack with the stick. Immediately an alarming cascade of blood spouted from the hole and began to form a dark lake on the grass. Mr. Myatt gasped, and the little girls set up a sudden chatter. I could understand how they felt. In fact, I was wondering how long the pony could stand this tremendous outflow without dropping down. It didn't seem to be coming out fast enough for Siegfried, however, because he produced another stick from his pocket, thrust it into the pony's mouth and began to work the jaws. And as the animal champed, the blood gushed more fiercely. When at least a gallon had come away, Siegfried seemed satisfied. "Slacken the rope, James," he cried, then rapidly closed the wound on the neck with a pin suture. Next he trotted over the grass and looked over a gate in the roadside wall. "Thought so," he shouted. "There's a little beck in that field. We've got to get him over to it. Come on, lend a hand, everybody." He was clearly enjoying himself, and his presence was having its usual effect. The Myatts were spurred suddenly into action and began to run around aimlessly, bumping into each other. I was gripped by a sudden tension and preparedness, and even the pony seemed to be taking an interest in his surroundings for the first time. All 5 of the gypsies pulled at the halter. Siegfried and I looped our arms behind the pony's thighs. Everybody gave encouraging shouts, and at last he began to move forward. It was a painful process, but he kept going, through the gate and across the field to where the shallow stream wandered among its rushes. There were no banks to speak of, and it was easy to push him out into the middle. As he stood there with the icy water rippling round his inflamed hoofs, I fancied I could read in his eyes a faint dawning of an idea that things were looking up at last. "Now he must stand in there for an hour," Siegfried said, "and then you'll have to make him walk round the field. Then another hour in the beck. As he gets better, you can give him more and more exercise, but he must come back to the beck. There's a lot of work for somebody here, so who's going to do it?" The 3 little girls came shyly round him and looked up wide-eyed into his face. Siegfried laughed. "You 3 want the job, do you? Right, I'll tell you just what to do." He pulled out the bag of peppermint drops, which was ever present among his widely varied pocket luggage, and I settled myself for a long wait. I had seen him in action with the children on the farms, and when that bag of sweets came out, everything stopped. It was the one time Siegfried was never in a hurry. The little girls each solemnly took a sweet, Then Siegfried squatted on his heels and began to address them like a professor with his class. They soon began to fall and put a word in for themselves. The smallest launched into a barely intelligible account of the remarkable things the pony had done when he was a foal, and Siegfried listened intently, nodding his head gravely now and then. There was all the time in the world. His words obviously went home, because over the next few days, whenever I passed the gypsy camp, I could see the three wild little figures either grouped round the pony in the back or dragging him round the field on a long halter shank. I didn't need to butt in. I could see he was improving all the time. It was about a week later that I saw the Myatts on their way out of Darrowby, the red caravan rocking across the marketplace, with Mr. Myatt up front wearing a black velvet cap, his wife by his side. Tethered to various parts of the caravan, the family of horses clopped along, and right at the rear was the piebald, a bit stiff perhaps, but going very well. He'd be all right. The little girls were looking out of the back doors, and as they spotted me, I waved. They looked back at me unsmilingly until they had almost turned the corner into Hallgate, then one of them shyly lifted her hand. The others followed suit, and my last sight was of them waving eagerly back. I strolled into the drovers and took a thoughtful half-pint into a corner. Siegfried had done the trick there all right, but I was wondering what to make of it, because in veterinary practice it is difficult to draw definite conclusions even after spectacular results. Was it my imagination, or did that pony seem to feel relief almost immediately after the bloodletting? Would we ever have got him moving without it? Was it really the right thing in these cases to bash a hole in the jugular and release about a bucketful of the precious fluid? I still don't have the answer, because I never dared try it for myself. Chapter 29. Could Mr. Herriot see my dog, please? Familiar enough words coming from the waiting room, but it was the voice that brought me to a slithering halt just beyond the door. It couldn't be. No, of course it couldn't. But it sounded just like Helen. I tiptoed back and applied my eye without hesitation to the crack in the door. Tristan was standing there looking down at somebody just beyond my range of vision. All I could see was a hand resting on the head of a patient sheepdog, the hem of a tweed skirt, and two silk-stockinged legs. They were nice legs, not skinny, and could easily belong to a big girl like Helen. My cogitations were cut short as a head bent over to speak to the dog, and I had a close-up in profile of the small straight nose and the dark hair falling across the milk smoothness of the cheek. I was still peering, bemused, when Tristan shot out of the room and collided with me. Stifling an oath, he grabbed my arm and hauled me along the passage into the dispensary. He shut the door and spoke in a hoarse whisper. "It's her, the Alderson woman, and she wants to see you. Not Siegfried, not me, but you, Mr. Herriot himself." He looked at me wide-eyed for a few moments. Then, as I stood hesitating, he opened the door and tried to propel me into the passage. "What the hell are you waiting for?" he hissed. "Well, it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? After that dance, I mean. Last time she saw me I was a lovely sight, so pie-eyed I couldn't even speak." Tristan struck his forehead with his hand. "God help us. You worry about details, don't you? She's asked to see you. What more do you want? Go on, get in there." I was shuffling off irresolutely when he raised a hand. "Just a minute. Stay right there." He trotted off and returned in a few seconds holding out a white lab coat. "Just back from the laundry," he said, as he began to work my arms into the starched sleeves. "You'll look marvellous in this, Jim. The immaculate young surgeon." I stood unresisting as he buttoned me into the garment, but struck away his hand when he started to straighten my tie. As I left him, he gave me a final encouraging wave before heading for the back stairs. I didn't give myself any more time to think, but marched straight into the waiting room. Helen looked up and smiled, and it was just the same smile. Nothing behind it, just the same friendly, steady-eyed smile as when I first met her. We faced each other in silence for some moments. Then, when I didn't say anything, she looked down at the dog. "It's Dan in trouble this time," she said. "He's our sheepdog, but we're so fond of him that he's more like one of the family." The dog wagged his tail furiously at the sound of his name, but yelped as he came towards me. I bent down and patted his head. "I see he's holding up a hind leg." "Yes, he jumped over a wall this morning, and he's been like that ever since. I think it's something quite bad. He can't put any weight on the leg." "Right, bring him through to the other room, and I'll have a look at him. But take him on in front of me, will you? And I'll be able to watch how he walks." I held the door open, and she went through ahead of me with the dog. Watching how Helen walked distracted me over the first few yards, but it was a long passage, and by the time we had reached the second bend, I had managed to drag my attention back to my patient. And glory be, it was a dislocated hip. It had to be, with that shortening of the limb, and the way he carried it underneath his body with the paw just brushing the ground. My feelings were mixed. This was a major injury, but on the other hand, the chances were I could put it right quickly and look good in the process. Because I had found in my brief experience that one of the most spectacular procedures in practice was the reduction of a dislocated hip. Maybe I had been lucky, but with the few I had seen, I had been able to convert an alarmingly lame animal into a completely sound one as though by magic. In the operating room, I hoisted Dan onto the table. He stood without moving as I examined the hip. There was no doubt about it at all. The head of the femur was displaced upwards and backwards, plainly palpable under my thumb. The dog looked round only once when I made a gentle attempt to flex the limb, but turned away immediately and stared resolutely ahead. His mouth hung open a little as he panted nervously, but like a lot of the placid animals which arrived on our surgery table, he seemed to have resigned himself to his fate. I had the strong impression that I could have started to cut his head off and he wouldn't have made much fuss. "Nice good-natured dog," I said, "and a bonny one too." Helen patted the handsome head with the broad blaze of white down the face. The tail waved slowly from side to side. "Yes," she said, "he's just as much a family pet as a working dog. I do hope he hasn't hurt himself too badly. Well, he has a dislocated hip. It's a nasty thing, but with a bit of luck, I ought to be able to put it back." "What happens if it won't go back?" "He'd have to form a false joint up there. He'd be very lame for several weeks and probably always have a slightly short leg." "Oh dear, I wouldn't like that," Helen said. "Do you think he'll be all right?" I looked at the docile animal, still gazing steadfastly to his front. "I think he's got a good chance, mainly because you haven't hung about for days before bringing him in. The sooner these things are tackled, the better." "Oh, good. When will you be able to start on him?" "Right now." I went over the door. "I'll just give Tristan a shout. This is a two-man job." "Couldn't I help?" Helen said. "I'd very much like to, if you wouldn't mind." I looked at her doubtfully. "Well, I don't know. You might not like playing tug-of-war with Dan in the middle. He'll be anaesthetised, of course, but there's usually a lot of pulling." Helen laughed. "Oh, I'm quite strong, and not a bit squeamish. I'm used to animals, you know, and I like working with them." "Right," I said. "Slip on this spare coat and we'll begin." The dog didn't flinch as I pushed the needle into his vein, and as the numb bottle flowed in, his head began to slump against Helen's arm and his supporting paw to slide along the smooth top of the table. Soon he was stretched unconscious on his side. I held the needle in the vein as I looked down at the sleeping animal. I might have to give him a bit more. They have to be pretty deep to overcome the muscular resistance. Another cc and Dan was as limp as any rag doll. I took hold of the affected leg and spoke across the table. "I want you to link your hands underneath his thigh and try to hold him there when I pull. OK? Here we go then." It takes a surprising amount of force to pull the head of a displaced femur over the rim of the acetabulum. I kept up a steady traction with my right hand, pressing on the head of the femur at the same time with my left. Helen did her part efficiently, leaning back against the pull, her lips pushed forward in a little pout of concentration. I suppose there must be a foolproof way of doing this job, a method which works the very first time, but I have never been able to find it. Success has always come to me only after a fairly long period of trial and error, and it was the same today. I tried all sorts of angles, rotations and twists on the flaccid limb, trying not to think of how it would look if this just happened to be the one I couldn't put back. I was wondering what Helen, still hanging on determinedly to her end, must be thinking of this wrestling match when I heard the muffled click. It was a sweet and welcome sound. I flexed the hip joint once or twice. No resistance at all now. The femoral head was once more riding smoothly in its socket. "Well, that's it," I said. "Hope it stays put. We'll have to keep our fingers crossed. The odd one does pop out again, but I've got a feeling this is going to be all right." Helen ran her hand over the silky ears and neck of the sleeping dog. Poor old Dan. He wouldn't have jumped over that wall this morning if he'd known what was in store for him. How long will it be before he comes round? Oh, he'll be out for the rest of the day. When he starts to wake up tonight, I want you to be around to steady him in case he falls and puts the thing out again. Perhaps you'd give me a ring. I'd like to know how things are. I gathered Dan up in my arms and was carrying him along the passage, staggering under his weight, when I met Mrs. Hall. She was carrying a tray with 2 cups. "I was just having a drink of tea, Mr. Herriot," she said. "I thought you and the young lady might fancy a cup." I looked at her narrowly. This was unusual. Was it possible she had joined Tristan in playing Cupid? But the broad, dark-skinned face was as unemotional as ever. It told me nothing. "Well, thanks very much, Mrs. Hall. I'll just put this dog outside first." I went out and settled down on the back seat of Helen's car. With only his eyes and nose sticking out from under a blanket, he looked at peace with the world. Helen was already sitting with a cup in her lap, and I thought of the other time I had drunk tea in this room with a girl. On the day I had arrived in Darrowby, she had been one of Siegfried's followers, and surely the toughest of them all. This was a lot different. During the struggle in the operating room, I had been able to observe Helen at close range, and I had discovered that her mouth turned up markedly at the corners, as though she was just going to smile, or had just been smiling. Also that the deep warm blue of the eyes under the smoothly arching brows made a dizzy in partnership with the rich black brown of her hair. And this time the conversation didn't lag. Maybe it was because I was on my own ground. Perhaps I never felt fully at ease, unless there was a sick animal involved somewhere. But at any rate, I found myself prattling effortlessly, just as I had done up on that hill when we had first met. Mrs. Hall's teapot was empty, and the last of the biscuits gone before I finally saw Helen off and started on my round. The same feeling of easy confidence was on me that night when I heard her voice on the phone. "Dan is up and walking about," she said. "He's still a bit wobbly, but he's perfectly sound on that leg." "Oh, great. He's got the first stage over. I think everything's going to be fine." There was a pause at the other end of the line. Then, "Thank you so much for what you've done. We were terribly worried about him, especially my young brother and sister. We were very grateful." "Not at all. I'm delighted too. He's a grand dog." I hesitated for a moment. It had to be now. "Oh, you remember we were talking about Scotland today? Well, I was passing the Plaza this afternoon, and I see they're showing a film about the Hebrides. I thought maybe... I wondered if perhaps you might like to come and see it with me." Another pause, and my heart did a quick thud-thud. "All right," Helen said. "Yes, I'd like that. When? Friday night? Well, thank you. Goodbye till then." I replaced the receiver with a trembling hand. Why did I make such heavy weather of these things? But it didn't matter. I was back in business. Chapter 30. Rheumatism is a terrible thing in a dog. It is painful enough in humans, but an acute attack can reduce an otherwise healthy dog to terrified, screaming immobility. Very muscular animals suffered most, and I went carefully as my fingers explored the bulging triceps and gluteals of the little Staffordshire Bull Terrier. Normally a tough little fellow, afraid of nothing, friendly, leaping high in an attempt to lick people's faces, but today rigid, trembling, staring anxiously in front of him. Even to turn his head a little brought a shrill howl of agony. Mercifully, it was something you could put right, and quickly too. I pulled the novalgin into the syringe and injected it rapidly. The little dog, oblivious to everything but the knife-like stabbing of the rheumatism, did not stir at the prick of the needle. I counted out some salicylate tablets into a box, wrote the directions on the lid, and handed the box to the owner. "Give him one of those as soon as the injection has eased him, Mr. Taverner. Then repeat in about 4 hours. I'm pretty sure he'll be greatly improved by then." Mrs. Taverner snatched the box away as her husband began to read the directions. "Let me see it," she snapped. "No doubt I'll be the one who has the job to do." It had been like that all the time, ever since I had entered the beautiful house with the terraced gardens leading down to the river. She had been at him ceaselessly while he was holding the dog for me. When the animal had yelped, she had cried, "Really, Henry, don't grip the poor thing like that. You're hurting him." She had kept him scuffling about for this and that, and when he was out of the room, she said, "You know, this is all my husband's fault. He will let the dog swim in the river. I knew this would happen." Halfway through, daughter Julia had come in, and it was clear from the start that she was firmly on Mamma's side. She helped out with plenty of "How could you, Daddy?" and "For God's sake, Daddy," and generally managed to fill in the gaps when her mother wasn't in full cry. The Taverners were in their 50s. He was a big, floridly handsome man who had made millions in the Tyneside shipyards before pulling out of the smoke to this lovely place. I had taken an instant liking to him. I had expected a tough tycoon, and had found a warm, friendly, curiously vulnerable man, obviously worried sick about his dog. I had reservations about Mrs. Taverner, despite her still considerable beauty. Her smile had a switched-on quality, and there was a little too much steel in the blue of her eyes. She had seemed less concerned about the dog than with the necessity of taking it out on her husband. Julia, a scaled-down model of her mother, drifted about the room with the aimless, bored look of the spoiled child, glancing blankly at the dog, or me, staring without interest through the window at the smooth lawns, the tennis court, the dark band of river under the trees. I gave the terrier a final reassuring pat on the head and got up from my knees. As I put away the syringe, Taverner took my arm. "Well, that's fine, Mr. Herriot. We're very grateful to you for relieving our minds. I must say I thought the old boy's time had come when he started yelling. And now you'll have a drink before you go." The man's hand trembled on my arm as he spoke. It had been noticeable too when he had been holding the dog's head, and I had wondered, maybe Parkinson's disease, or nerves, or just drink. Certainly he was pouring a generous measure of whisky into his glass, but as he tipped up the bottle his hand was seized by an even more violent tremor, and he slopped the spirit onto the polished sideboard. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" Mrs. Taverner burst out. There was a bitter note of "oh, no, not again" in her cry, and Julia struck her forehead with her hand and raised her eyes to heaven. Taverner shot a single-hunted look at the woman, then grinned as he handed me my glass. "Come and sit down, Mr. Herriot," he said. "I'm sure you have time to relax for a few minutes." We moved over to the fireside, and Taverner talked pleasantly about dogs, and the countryside, and the pictures which hung on the walls of the big room. Those pictures were noted in the district. Many of them were originals by famous painters, and they had become the main interest in Taverner's life. His other passion was clocks, and as I looked round the room at the rare and beautiful timepieces standing among elegant period furniture, it was easy to believe the rumours I had heard about the wealth within these walls. The women did not drink with us. They had disappeared when the whisky was brought out. But as I drained my glass, the door was pushed open, and they stood there looking remarkably alike in expensive tweed coats and fur-trimmed hats. Mrs. Taverner, pulling on a pair of motoring gloves, looked with distaste at her husband. "We're going into Broughton," she said. "Don't know when we'll be back." Behind her, Julia stared coldly at her father, her lip curled slightly. Taverner did not reply. He sat motionless as I listened to the roar of the car engine and the spatter of whipped-up gravel beyond the window. Then he looked out, blank-faced, empty-eyed, at the drifting cloud of exhaust smoke in the drive. There was something in his expression which chilled me. I put down my glass and got to my feet. "Afraid I must be moving on, Mr. Taverner. Thanks for the drink." He seemed suddenly to be aware of my presence. The friendly smile returned. "Not at all. Thank you for looking after the old boy. He seems better already." In the driving mirror, the figure at the top of the steps looked small and alone till the high shrubbery hid him from my view. The next call was to a sick pig high on Mustang Fell. The road took me at first along the fertile valley floor, winding under the riverside trees past substantial farmhouses and rich pastures. But as the car left the road and headed up a steep track, the country began to change. The transition was almost violent as the trees and bushes thinned out and gave way to the bare rocky hillside and the miles of limestone walls. And though the valley had been rich with the fresh green of the new leaves, up here the buds were unopened, and the naked branches stretched against the sky still had the look of winter. Tim Alton's farm lay at the top of the track, and as I pulled up at the gate I wondered, as I always did, how the man could scrape a living from those few harsh acres with the grass flattened and yellowed by the wind which always blew. At any rate, many generations had accomplished the miracle, and had lived and struggled and died in that house with its outbuildings crouching in the lee of a group of stunted wind-bent trees, its massive stones crumbling under 3 centuries of fierce weathering. Why should anybody want to build a farm in such a place? I turned as I opened the gate, and looked back at the track threading between the walls, down and down to where the white stones of the river glittered in the spring sunshine. Maybe the builder had stood here and looked across the green vastness and breathed in the cold sweet air and thought it was enough. I saw Tim Alton coming across the yard. There had been no need to lay down concrete or cobbles here. They had just swept away the thin soil, and there between house and buildings was a sloping stretch of fissured rock. It was more than a durable surface, it was everlasting. "It's your pig this time, then, Tim," I said, and the farmer nodded seriously. "Aye, right as out yesterday, and lay flat like a dead un this morning. Never looked up when I filled his trough, and by God, when a pig won't tackle his grub, there's summat far wrong." Tim dug his hands inside the broad leather belt which encircled his oversized trousers, and which always seemed to be about to nip his narrow frame in two, and led the way gloomily into the sty. Despite the bitter poverty of his existence, he was a man who took misfortune cheerfully. I had never seen him look like this, and I thought I knew the reason. There is something personal about the family pig. Smallholders like Tim Alton made their meagre living from a few cows. They sold their milk to the big dairies or made butter, and they killed a pig or two each year and cured it themselves for home consumption. On the poorer places it seemed to me that they ate little else. Whatever meal I happened to stumble in on, the cooking smell was always the same, roasting fat bacon. It appeared to be a matter of pride to make the pig as fat as possible. In fact, on these little wind-blown farms, where the people and the cows and the dogs were lean and spare, the pig was about the only fat thing to be seen. I had seen the Alton pig before. I had been stitching a cow's torn teat about a fortnight ago, and Tim had patted me on the shoulder and whispered, "Now come along wi' me, Mr. Herriot, and I'll show thee summat." We had looked into the sty at a 25-stone monster, effortlessly emptying a huge trough of wet meal. I could remember the pride in the farmer's eyes, and the way he listened to the smacking and slobbering as if to great music. It was different today. The pig looked, if possible, even more enormous as it lay on its side, eyes closed, filling the entire floor of the sty like a beached whale. Tim splashed a stick among the untouched meal in the trough and made encouraging noises, but the animal never stirred. The farmer looked at me with haggard eyes. "He's bad, Mr. Herriot. It's serious, whatever it is." I had been taking the temperature, and when I read the thermometer, I whistled. 107. That's some fever. The colour drained from Tim's face. "Oh, hell. 107? It's hopeless, then. It's over with him." I had been feeling them along the animal's side, and I smiled reassuringly. "No, don't worry, Tim. I think he's going to be all right. He's got erysipelas. Here, put your fingers along his back. You can feel a lot of flat swellings on his skin. Those are the diamonds. He'll have a beautiful rash within a few hours, but at the moment you can't see it, you can only feel it." "And you can make him better?" "I'm nearly sure I can. I'll give him a whacking dose of serum, and I'd like to bet you'll have his nose in that trough in a couple of days. Most of them get over it all right." "Well, that's a bit of good news, any road," said Tim, a smile flooding over his face. "You had me worried there with your 107, dang you." I laughed. "Sorry, Tim, didn't mean to frighten you. I'm often happier to see a high temperature than a low one. But it's a funny time for erysipelas. We usually see it in late summer. All right, I'll let you off this time. Come in and wash your hands." In the kitchen I ducked my head, but couldn't avoid bumping the massive side of bacon hanging from the beam ceiling. The heavy mass rocked gently on its hooks. It was about 8 inches thick in parts, all pure white fat. Only by close inspection was it possible to discern a thin strip of lean meat. Mrs. Alton produced a cup of tea, and as I sipped I looked across at Tim, who had fallen back into a chair and lay with his hands hanging down. For a moment he closed his eyes, and his face became a mask of weariness. I thought for the 100th time about the endless labour which made up the lives of these little farmers. Alton was only 40, but his body was already bent and ravished by the constant demands he made on it. You could read his story in the corded forearms, the rough, work-swollen fingers. He told me once that the last time he missed a milking was 12 years ago, and that was for his father's funeral. I was taking my leave when I saw Jenny. She was the Altons' eldest child, and was pumping vigorously at the tyre of her bicycle, which was leaning against the wall just outside the kitchen door. "Going somewhere?" I asked, and the girl straightened up quickly, pushing back a few strands of dark hair from her forehead. She was about 18, with delicate features and large expressive eyes. In her wild pinched prettiness there was something of the wheeling curlews, the wind and sun, the wide emptiness of the moors. "I'm going down to village." She stole a glance into the kitchen. "I'm going to get a bottle of Guinness for Dad." "The village? It's a long way to go for a bottle of Guinness. It must be 2 miles, and then you've got to push back up this hill. Are you going all that way just for one bottle?" "Aye, just one," she whispered, countering out a 6pence and some coppers into her palm with calm absorption. "Dad's been up all night waiting for a heifer to calve. He's tired out. I won't be long, and he can have his Guinness with his dinner. That's what he likes." She looked up at me conspiratorially. "It'll be a surprise for him." As she spoke, her father, still sprawled in the chair, turned his head and looked at her. He smiled, and for a moment I saw a serenity in the steady eyes, a nobility in the seamed face. Jenny looked at him for a few seconds, a happy secret look from under her lowered brows. Then she turned quickly, mounted her bicycle, and began to pedal down the track at surprising speed. I followed her more slowly, the car in second gear, bumping and swaying over the stones. I stared straight ahead, lost in thought. I couldn't stop my mind roaming between the 2 houses I had visited, between the gracious mansion by the river and the crumbling farmhouse I had just left. From Henry Taverner, with his beautiful clothes, his well-kept hands, his rows of books and pictures and clocks, to Tim Alton, with his worn chest-high trousers nipped in by that great belt, his daily, monthly, yearly grind to stay alive on that unrelenting hilltop. But I kept coming back to the daughters, to the contempt in Julia Taverner's eyes when she looked at her father, and the shining tenderness in Jenny Alton's. It wasn't so easy to work out as it seemed. In fact, it became increasingly difficult to decide who was getting the most out of their different lives. But as I guided the car over the last few yards of the track and pulled on to the smooth tarmac of the road, it came to me with unexpected clarity. Taking it all in all, if I had the choice to make, I'd settle for the Guinness.